Hi, friends. I'm Rebecca Faust, and this is What We Don't Say, where we have honest conversations about fear, patterns, growth, what it looks like to reconnect with yourself. In other words, all the things we experience but don't typically say out loud. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in. Over the last few episodes, we've talked about feeling like something is off, survival mechanisms, fear, and the phrase, I don't know. And if you've been listening, you might be starting to think, okay, Rebecca, if I'm disconnected from myself, if my survival mechanism is loud, if I keep defaulting to, I don't know, how do I actually start hearing myself again? How do I reconnect with myself? How do I figure out what I want? And what I want to offer today might be a little frustrating for some of my fellow high achievers because most of us want clarity immediately. We want the answer yesterday. We want to know now. Should I stay or should I go? Should I take the promotion? What should I do next? What's my purpose? What do I really want? Because once we have the answer, we can make a plan. And boy, do we love a plan. Because once we have a plan, we can get back to achieving. I see you because I am you. And here's what I've learned. Most of us high achievers are trying to force clarity. Unfortunately, clarity doesn't typically respond well to force. Go figure. One of the biggest misconceptions I see is that people think they need to figure out what they want. Like the answer is hiding somewhere. If we think hard enough, analyze hard enough, journal hard enough, ask enough people, make enough pros and cons lists, eventually we'll crack the code. But that's not actually what I've seen work. What I've seen is that most people already know far more than they think they do. The issue isn't that the answer isn't there. The issue is that there's too much noise. The problem isn't a lack of answers. The problem is a lack of space. Imagine walking into a crowded restaurant, maybe your favorite. People are talking, plates are clanging, music's playing, maybe a band is even playing live. Servers are moving all around. There's laughter, noise everywhere. Everyone is having a grand time. And then I ask you to listen to one conversation happening across the room. Do you think you could hear it? You probably couldn't. Not because the conversation isn't happening, not even because those people are whispering, but because there's too much other noise. And I think that's how many of us are living. Work, kids, pets, partners, emails, social media, podcasts, news, audiobooks, responsibilities, regular books, achievement, more achievement, noise. Some of it's good noise. And then we wonder why we can't hear ourselves. One of the practices that has helped me and many of my clients is morning pages. I first learned about it probably 2 decades ago from Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way. And despite the title, I think it's one of the best books for reconnecting with yourself. The idea is simple. You write. That's it. No agenda, no trying to sound smart, no trying to solve anything, no plan, no judgment. You just write. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 3 pages, whatever. And honestly, many of my morning pages have started with, I don't know what to write today. I can't believe I don't know what to write. Nothing is happening. What's wrong with me? And then eventually, something starts to come out. At first, it's usually what I call the gunk, the worries, frustrations, overthinking, conversations you keep replaying, that thing you're annoyed about, perhaps what you've been avoiding, the thing you're trying to solve, many, many to-dos. And after a while, something interesting starts happening. Patterns emerge. You notice recurring thoughts, recurring frustrations, recurring fears, recurring judgments, recurring desires, and eventually surprises emerge. Ideas, preferences, observations, dreams, things you didn't realize you knew or heard or saw or remembered. Things you didn't realize you wanted or cared about. And that's when it gets really interesting. And honestly, I think part of the reason many of us struggle to create space is because we're afraid of what we might hear. Not consciously, of course. Most of us aren't sitting around thinking, I hope I never reconnect with myself. But when things get quiet, we might hear things we've been avoiding. We might hear, I'm exhausted. I'm angry. I'm lonely. This isn't working. I miss painting. I miss writing. I need help. I don't actually want that promotion. I want more. I want less. I want something different. And for a lot of high achievers, as we talked about in our survival mechanism discussion, that's uncomfortable. Because if I admit I'm exhausted, I may have to stop. If I admit I want something different, I may have to disappoint someone. If I admit I don't want the promotion, or maybe even I do want the promotion, I may have to rethink who I thought I was. So sometimes staying busy feels safer. If I keep moving, I don't have to listen. If I keep solving, I don't have to feel. If I keep achieving, I don't have to sit with the uncomfortable stuff. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. But what I found is that what's waiting underneath typically isn't nearly as scary as we imagine. Most of the time, it's just a part of ourselves that's been trying to get our attention for a very long time. Now, when I talk about morning pages, I'm not super attached to the pages themselves. I'm attached to the practice of creating enough space to hear yourself. For me, sometimes morning pages is journaling and writing, and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's running. When I go out for a run, I usually have music playing, but kind of quietly. I can hear it, but it's not blaring. And I let my mind wander. Sometimes I'm processing. Sometimes I'm complaining. Sometimes I'm replaying a conversation over and over. What could they have said? What do I wish they would have said? What do I wish I would have said? Sometimes I'm sorting through something I didn't even realize was bothering me. And I want to make an important distinction here because if you're one of my people, you are very likely an overthinker. What happens on my runs is very different from what happens when I'm lying awake at 2 in the morning staring at the ceiling. At 2 in the morning, I'm usually spiraling, replaying, worrying, trying to force an answer, trying to solve something. Running feels completely different. I assume it has to be the movement. The motion, I assume, helps me process the thoughts instead of getting stuck in them. It's like the thoughts are more easily able to move through me instead of just bouncing around inside my head. So while it may look like thinking on the outside, it feels very different on the inside. It feels less like rumination and more like processing. And honestly, most of the time, I do not finish my run with answers. I finish my run with less noise. And I love that because I think that's actually the goal. Not necessarily answers, but less noise. The goal isn't to get answers. The goal is to create enough space for answers to emerge. For some people, that's morning pages. For some, it's voice memos on a long commute. For others, it's walking, gardening, sewing, hiking, sitting on the porch. The method isn't the important part. It's the listening that's important. And yes, this can be especially hard for high achievers because we've been rewarded our entire lives for doing, for action, for solving, for figuring things out quickly, for productivity, for keeping all the plates spinning, for being efficient. So when we don't know something, our instinct is often think harder, push harder, research more, create another spreadsheet. I see you. And listen, I'm saying this with love because I am you. Creating space can feel wildly unproductive, almost irresponsible, like we're wasting time. But what if space isn't the opposite of productivity? What if space is actually what makes meaningful productivity possible? What if slowing down for 5 minutes helps you stop spending 5 months, dare I say 5 years, chasing something you don't actually want? That's a trade I'd make every time, as uncomfortable as it may be. Because clarity often arrives differently than we expect. Most of us high achievers think clarity arrives through effort, through figuring it out, through thinking harder, through creating another plan. But often, clarity arrives through space, through listening, through noticing, through creating enough room to hear what was already there. When my clients start hearing themselves again, it usually isn't dramatic. They start by having preferences. They might notice themselves saying, actually, or I'd rather, no, that doesn't work for me. They start creating time for themselves bit by bit. They stop filling every available minute. They stop doing every available task. They become curious. They start asking, what do I think? What might I want? What sounds fun? What sounds meaningful? And little by little, they stop treating their wants like they're at the bottom of the list. I'd love to leave you with a few questions in case you need help getting started. Where in your life have you stopped creating space for yourself? When was the last time you sat quietly with your own thoughts? What helps you hear yourself best? Writing, walking, running, talking, something else? Is there something you've been too busy to hear? And what might you hear if you gave yourself just 5 little minutes? So here's the bad news. You likely don't need another plan, even though you want one. Right now, you probably don't need another answer, even though you want one. You may not need to figure everything out today, even though I know you'd really like to. You simply likely need a little more space because often the answers we're looking for aren't missing, they're just buried underneath the noise. And sometimes underneath that noise is a part of you that's been trying to get your attention for a very long time. Okay, if something in this episode resonated, my fellow overthinker, I invite you to not just think about it. Try it. 5 minutes, a journal, a walk, run, voice memo, while you're in the shower, whatever helps you begin listening. And see what happens when you stop trying to force clarity and start creating space for it to emerge. Take care, friends. Be well, and I will see you next time.